but I would like to say that I'm pretty impressed by the level of speakers here and also by the next speaker. She took the Danish economy and the Danish people through the 2008 crisis. She has been the Prime Minister of Denmark between 11 and 15, stabilizing after a bump in the economy. And she has been the CEO of Save the Children International from 16 to 19. She is also, in the light of yesterday, a fighter for female leadership and to be ourselves as women in leadership. And I think she has served as a woman role model for many, amongst others for me. I admire her courage, and although we do not come from the same parties, I must say that I have admired you always and supported your career on a distance as much as I could. So with that, please welcome on stage also today a member of the Oversight Board of Meta, Helle Thorning Schmidt.
Thank you so much. That was almost too kind. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming. I think in many ways you have served not only as a role model for the Danish women, but also really represented us very well internationally. And I must say that I've followed your career, every step of your career, and I'm super impressed with that. So now, you were you came from politics and being a prime minister, and you went straight into tech, or?
Am I in tech? Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so impressed with this conference. I'm impressed what the organization stands for that you are leading. You should be very proud of your achievements and your award yesterday. So happy for you. So I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. For any of you who does not know what I'm doing right now, obviously I was Prime Minister, then I was in the NGO sector, and now I have a board portfolio. But one of the things I do is that I am the co-chair of Meta's Oversight Board, which was basically set up 3 years ago to oversee the most difficult content moderation decisions of Meta with an independence, because that was very, very important to me and the other members of this board, so we can take any decision we want. We don't have to ask Meta, we don't have to look into Meta's business model when we take decisions. Meta has to follow our decisions, and also we give a lot of recommendations to Meta on content moderations. And 3 years in, I think we are beginning to see how Meta is changing. I will hopefully come back to that because of the decisions that we are taking, content moderation, decision by content moderation. So that's basically what we're doing, and I'm co-chairing that with 3 other co-chairs.
Yeah, there's a lot of really important learnings, and let's get back to that. I of course, with this event being about resilience, our report, and Ukraine, and thank you for mentioning my award yesterday. With Ukraine, we've seen these hybrid threats, right? We have seen cyber attacks followed by misinformations, right? Are there some learnings from this crisis with Ukraine and the hybrid threat that we can already kind of deduct now that we have learned from that?
I think so, and I think Minister was mentioning that as well, and I think seen from a member state perspective, it is very clear that none of these disinformation or the attacks that we are seeing can be solved without governments, the EU of course, and business working together. Because it is simply the fact that governments don't have the tools and perhaps the knowledge to solve these issues themselves. And we've seen how big companies helped in Ukraine, like very direct assistance, how your own organization pushed that help. And I think that shows for everything that we need to know that we cannot do anything in this space without the collaboration between government and tech. And I think that goes for all the regulation that's coming in the EU right now, that nothing can happen without that collaboration.
So we have seen now the EU was banning Russian language media, etc., and there's been some retaliations. I mean, what has that meant for, do you think it was the right decision? Is it balanced? And what has it meant for your role and for Meta?
Well, looking at it with my all-political hat, I'm convinced that if I had been the Prime Minister at that time, we would have recommended the same thing based on the information you have with other heads of states of government and politicians. So I think it probably was the right decision. But you also have to understand that when we ban Russian media in our parts of the world, they're going to do the same. So Meta, for example, was banned very, very quickly in the conflict, which obviously means that anyone who wants to have that kind of communication will be banned for getting information from the outside world, internally in Russia. Journalists will not be getting that information. So we're cutting down a lot of free speech, and of course that impacts several civil movements in Russia, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in Russia severely missing their social media platforms, not for fun, but for really serious issues. So that is, everything has a price in that direction.
Yes, but you still think is the only choice in that situation?
I think
but it
so.
has consequences.
I think so, but we always have to understand that if we shut down in one area, it will have huge impact for free speech in other areas. And one of the reasons why I joined the Oversight Board is because I'm still passionate, or will always be passionate about free speech. And I think we have to be so careful with that, making sure that free speech and access to that agency that comes with free speech is global. And the reason why I took this role is because I want to keep fighting for that. And I don't think tech can solve that on its own, and I don't think governments can solve that. Governments should stay away from actually trying to do that. So I do think there should be there's a space in the middle of all that for independent oversight.
Yeah. So, I mean, I remember speaking to Jourova, to Vice President Jourova, and one of the things that she said, she's from Czechia and Czech Republic, and she said, well, we live with, banning of content and control and censorship, during the Russian regime, and she said, well, what do we put online? So. Even places in Europe, we have it's not well seen to be a homosexual or to have an abortion. Yeah. So, the thin line between that. So what kind of content, in your view, should be taken down? I mean, where's the line?
Well, I think the most important thing is that content moderation is done based on transparency, that we know which rules are followed. And one of the rules that we have added to Meta's own community standards is human rights standards. Human rights standards is something that is valuable for all of us, who actually is something that we should all be following. So we are making Meta change the way they do content moderation. So first of all, they can't do it all on their own. It's no longer just Mark Zuckerberg taking the most difficult content moderation decisions, which is a very, very good thing. But they also have to do this based on transparency. They have to tell how they do the rules, and more, perhaps equally important, principles of human rights. So we use this in every case, and I urge all of you to go on our website and see our cases, because we take everything and say, what are the basic human rights principles at stake here, and try to balance those. With a notion that free speech is really important, but it's not the only human right. So if my free speech is impacting you in a harmful way, then we have to find the balance between different human rights, and that's basically what we're trying to do. So our decisions are very varied. We've taken loads of decisions, and Meta has really, I think, been very, very good at picking those up. They have to follow our decisions, but they've also been good at picking up our recommendations. Only a few weeks ago, we ruled that they had to allow, in Iran, for example, that people could demonstrate and say, death to a dictator. Normally death too is not allowed on the platforms because it's a harsh thing to say, but we said this is how you demonstrate in Iran right now, and they have to allow it. And only a few days after we had told them to do that, they allowed that on the platform, which is basically changing not only how human moderators look at that, but also how their product is working. So we have seen many examples of where Meta is basically finding a different balance based on transparency, tell consumers what is happening based on principles. And that is what we are putting into content moderation. And I'm hoping in the future that it will not only be Meta who wants content moderation with those principles, but more tech platforms as such.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, the whole ethical subjects is really moving into the board, and like you said, hopefully for many other companies also. So we have seen in Europe always says we're like the front runners on digital policy making, on regulation. We had the DSA, etc. So do you see that as a step in the right direction? And where's the balance between doing this in Europe and doing this in the rest of the world, and how to interpret that in different systems? And
I love that question, because I think we really have to understand that Europe is, of course, the front runner on this, and I am a staunch European. I've always been a European, and believe really that we should take decisions at a European level. So there's two things I feel we have to try and avoid. When we do European legislation, we have to try and avoid that gets interpreted or regulated at the national level. And I'm actually a little bit worried with the DSA that we end up having national regulation and not working together. So that's one worry. Imagine that for companies, big tech companies, that they have to comply. And imagine that for users. I really think that users have to be given more rights. We are pushing Meta to tell users, for example, why their content gets removed. Users have very few rights when their content gets removed or why it stays up. And we are pushing Meta to give more rights to users. So users have no interest in national legislation that don't communicate. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, that everything we do in Europe will be looked at by the rest of the world and will, in a way, be copied in the rest of the world. So we have, in Europe, a duty of care to make sure that the legislation we do here can actually be used in the rest of the world. But because there is no such thing as a regionalized content moderation. That's why we are a global board. The content moderation that we do in one country and tell Meta to change things, they will change that globally. So I think it's very important that we understand that any European legislation will inspire the rest of the world and kind of have to be used in the rest of the world. And one thing I'm concerned about, and that we have seen in many cases also in Meta's universe, is that that a lot of state actors are interfering with content moderation. And one of the things we have asked Meta to do is to publicize when a government or a government body has interfered in content moderation. Do you guys know that this is happening all the time? It is. It is happening all the time. And we had a very interesting case about drill music in the UK. You don't think that can be a principal case, but it can actually, because the Metropolitan Police had interacted with Meta to get content removed. And what we are telling Meta is, tell us when government are interfering. And I'm a little bit worried that that will be interpreted in a very heavy-handed way in other parts of the world if we don't put a little balance around how much governments can interfere in content moderation.
So I see here, if I understand correct, three kind of structural challenges. One being that in EU, if we're interpreted in different ways.
Yes.
I already said somewhere, you know, we have even abortion being not legal and other things. So we would have differences of legal rights within Europe. But how do we solve the international challenge? Are you looking for like an international convention? Is it United Nations? I mean, is there a fundamental rights principle that we need to kind of interpretate into this, or how do you look at possible solutions there?
I always felt that the UN should be more active in talking about content moderation and regulation of big tech. And I do fear that we are now doing regulation in all parts of the world. There's stuff coming in India, there's stuff coming in Brazil, things happen in the US, even in the UK they're doing their own legislation. Will that be good for anyone? And of course we have to think of the tech companies, but where I'm sitting now, I'm thinking of the users. What are the rights of the users? How do we ensure agency and free speech for users? And how do we ensure that one piece of content is not treated differently in different parts of the world. So I would actually, that's why I joined the Oversight Board. I want to be able to prove to the world that there is a middle ground here where tech companies don't do all their content moderation themselves because they're not very good at it when they don't get scrutinized. And we've seen that with Meta, for example. But that governments also stay at arm's length from content moderation because they are certainly not very good at it. And so many governments are really quite keen to get into content moderation, particularly in autocratic states. And don't forget that most of the world's population do not live in democracies. So let's keep that under consideration. And that's why I'm trying with the Oversight Board to give an example of how you can do content moderation outside this, and I'm hoping that that will actually be a model that is used more by other tech companies. Meta has been very in the forefront of this by starting this, but I'm hoping that other tech companies will do the same. And I'm also hoping that the Digital Services Act can help us in that direction. So everyone has to do something. You have an enormous role in this, perhaps bigger than anyone, to make sure that we find balanced approaches to content moderation, because we don't want to fall in the gap saying, tech companies can just do this themselves, users have no rights, or governments will do too heavy-handed regulation.
So much more transparency on what's being removed, why, reasoning, offering the information to the users, and potentially some kind of international independent oversight body that can actually manage these rules worldwide. Yeah,
that is my goal. My goal with being on the Oversight Board is to demonstrate how we need to combine human rights and principles and transparency into content moderation. And we haven't seen that before we started doing this. And now we have the DSA, and I'm hoping that anyone who works with the DSA, of which many people are in this room, will really think hard about how can we make sure that we comply, but actually comply in a way that will be helpful for users of tech, social media, and make sure that we don't politicize this too much and over-regulate too much. And that's why we are in Brussels on a regular basis trying to find out how can we as an Oversight Board help to implement the DSA in a way that where we find the right balances. So that's what we are trying to do. It's an experiment. It's an experiment, and we all, you on that in that place as well, where we're all trying to find out how we're going to regulate this, how are we going to do this so it becomes coherent, international, super global, and keeps the rights of citizens to express themselves freely on social media.
Yeah. So, thank you for that vision. I think that takes us, I mean, at least it creates a vision on where we're going here, right? Yeah. And really highlighting some of the bigger challenges of fragmentation and rights of the users. And there is one thing I need to ask you, of course, I mean, the Trump case, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Let's jump to it. So, he was removed from the platform, now he's back on. Did they make the right decision in the first place, and why is he back there? And tell us a little bit of insight here.
The Trump case was an amazing, very interesting decision for us, and we were very happy that Meta asked us to look at this case. It wasn't the user that asked us to look at this case, it was Meta themselves. There's different ways you can take a case. A user can apply, Meta can ask us, refer a case, and we can also do policy advisory opinions, which are bigger policy advice to Meta. But this was a case referred from Meta. And what we basically agreed with Meta was that because Trump was removed when he was saying things that could cause real-life harm, it was okay to remove Trump. But what we said to Meta, which was we really changed things in Meta, is that they couldn't just make up the rules as they were going. They couldn't have these arbitrary rules, and we asked them to create a protocol around these difficult decisions that they could follow. And we also asked them that when they give a sanction to anybody, it doesn't matter if it's Mr. Trump or anybody, that they actually follow their own sanction system, to find a sanction system so they don't just invent a sanction as they're moving. And that's what we told Meta to do. And I'm quite happy to see that now they're reinstated Trump. based on a protocol or some guardrails, which they have tried to do an analysis of whether reinstating Trump would cause real-life harm. They have come to the conclusion, talking to experts, that it wouldn't cause real-life harm, and on that basis they have reinstated Mr. Trump. And I think what I appreciate about that is that they have followed a process and a protocol and become more transparent in that. The other thing we have done to Meta, which is amazing, I think, we have asked them to treat their celebrity users or big users like Mr. Trump as anyone else. They had a very special scheme called cross-check that no one knew about. And we have actually investigated that cross-check system. And now they have promised that they will treat these celebrity users like everyone else because they gave too many rights to celebrity users. They let them stay on without putting them through the normal content moderation decisions that they would have for everyone else. So I think we are making progress, and these are very good examples. The top examples that Trump can actually have an effect for all other users, and also try to shed a light on what systems they have in Meta. This was so opaque 3 years ago, and because we can ask questions all the time and get the answers, we can actually find out what's going on in this big machine of Meta. And I'm very proud of the work we have done, but I also want to appreciate Meta for having dared this, to opening their closets a little bit. And sometimes what we find is quite amazing. We find content moderations rules that they hadn't publicized, that were just hidden somewhere, no one knew about it. So we are opening the doors to Meta, and that transparency will be extremely good for users, also when we take a Trump case.
And also if the governments do it at the same time, right? With their content moderations, as I heard.
Yeah, I think, honestly, I think government should stay out of content moderation, and I think they should set the rules for this and set rules so that users get rights. When I'm looking at the Digital Services Act, it's about getting users' rights, and I'm hoping that big tech platforms will use that new legislation to grant users more rights. And I'm hoping that also the Oversight Board can play a part in that.
Helle Thorning Schmidt, thank you so much for coming. Once again, I think they're very lucky to have you.
Thank you.
And thank you for taking this very important subject that also is about resilience and how we handle misinformation in the future. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you much for having me. Thank you.